If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain how Anchor is your one-stop shop for creating podcasts. It's free. Yes, you heard me correctly. Anchor is free. And there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will also distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more platforms. Do you like to make money? Well, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership required. Everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today.
Offended,
right.
I mean,
so, but at the same time, should they not? If they're saying the same thing, just different words, maybe even on a completely different subject, should they not be held accountable to the same rules that they're trying to essentially force on other people?
My policy personally would be for one of consistency. If you ban A, you ban B.
Right. That makes sense.
That said, you again run into nuance, and you again run into who is making the judgment about it, and how are you doing it.
Absolutely.
So, for example, we want to have a society where our kids might not be exposed to a woman's breasts.
Right.
But at the same time, we want to have, and again, obscenity or not obscenity, it depends on the location, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Right. But on the other hand, we want to be able to have educational films about breastfeeding.
Right.
Right. So you come to nuance. Let me go back though onto consequences, and let me also go back onto capitalism. One of the things that infuriates people over and over again is the misunderstanding of what the First Amendment says. Right? The First Amendment says that the government should not regulate speech. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you're on my site, if it's my bat and my ball, I get to decide whether you're out at first or not. Right. You can choose not to play ball anymore with me, and that's fine. Right. That's your right. Neither of those things is cancel culture. That is capitalism in action. Now, hold on just one second. I just want to say, if I own the site and I say, I don't like what you're doing, you can feel free to leave. And if enough people leave, then my site is no longer economically feasible. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there are standards of things that have to be imposed.
Sure.
So, for example, I'm not really very popular. I'm not really. No, I'm not popular either. But I'm not really very supportive of the Daily Stormer.
I can't imagine why not.
Daily Stormer.
It's a white nationalist forum.
It is.
Gross!
It is
like the old Stormblast crap.
Yes.
Yeah, it's bad.
Okay.
I'm going to go one step further. One of the great ironies of this time, it's not only a white nationalist forum, it's also a singles place where white nationalists can meet other white nationalists.
Oh.
Okay, so I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Wow.
They really do have. I've read about that. I have never. But anyway. I do not believe, I do not want to support them. On the other hand, I would not support a law that would unequivocally ban them. But if it turns out that the Daily Stormer has a large forum called "Let's All Kill the Jews on Tuesday at 6 p.m., that's probably a violation of some law, right?
It would definitely be a cause for a
different line. It's crossing a line of legality. It's crossing a line, not just that it's offensive and it's wrong, but it's
and the same
it's
thing
legally wrong.
the same thing goes throughout a lot of this stuff. So, Red, let's go back to the election law and IDs and that. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get bogged down on the ID thing, because that's not the whole of the law. We're not. I mean, that's not the whole of the law that Georgia passed, and people might be accepting of that, but not, And again, what we're talking about the IDs, may change. If, for example, if you say that you have to have a driver's license to vote, then you're kind of discriminating against people that don't drive. But that aside, but then it turns out that there's no place to get a driver's license within 100 miles of these rural areas, and these rural areas are 98% black or Hispanic or whatever minority or white, right? That blonde-haired white people just can't get this thing and therefore can't vote. Especially if it's a federal election, now you're violating the federal law. Right. And that's problematic. Let me go up and say personally, I think we it's time for us to scrap our arcane voting system. I think that that biometrics and phone is just fine. I think that you can get to or computer. The problem that comes up with that is, again, I got 3 computers in this room. I only put my cover back on that one because I was going to have company. but I mean, again, if you say that and you show that by doing that you are disenfranchising a large segment of the population that doesn't have access to that, that's problematic. I mean, what we want to do is we want to have as many people vote as possibly can. Right. And that should be our guiding principle. But again, there are laws about this. Let me also say historical perspective, that in the United States we have a long and documented history of things like the poll tax, of measures that were the state that I'm going to pick on, where my daughter lives, it's a wonderful, lovely state, is North Carolina. When people that passed laws say on camera, we passed these laws to make sure that black people don't vote, right? You know about Governor Gary? Do you know about that?
I can't say I do.
I don't think so.
Governor Gary, back in the 19th century, reapportioned his state map. He drew these weird voting districts. And somebody looked at it and said, that looks like a salamander. And somebody said, it's not a salamander, it's a gerrymander, and that's the origin of that term. Oh, really? It's just geometry, right? You can divvy up a state, you can divvy up state voting lines so that it gives one political party an unfair advantage. Right. So that all the Democrats in a state, the state might be 50-50, but the Democrats only get to elect 25% of the elected representatives, and the Republicans, etc. That kind of stuff is unfair. There was a case recently where the incumbent redrew the district lines right before a primary, so that his opponent no longer lived in the area where he was running.
Of course.
If you ever take a look at the Texas voting districts, it'll explain why Ted Cruz keeps on getting elected. You wouldn't think that Austin would do that, but it seems that parts of Austin are in Dallas and parts are in Houston. For voting purposes. I mean, we've done those kinds of things. I think that at the end of the day, stuff that most Americans would agree on is just scrap that stuff. Just scrap all the districting and just say you vote for the people in the area that you want to vote for. I mean, those things were done for political purposes. Quote from Louis L'Amour, the old Western writer, about doing things unfairly. He said, They ain't a horse that can't be rode and ain't a rider that can't be throwed. And the simple thing is, no matter what the mechanism is, somebody can figure out a way to game it.
Oh, yeah. Welcome to life. I mean, no matter what, it is never going to be foolproof. It is never going, we're human. We screw up. We make mistakes, some on purpose, some not. And so there's always I think what people forget is there's always going to be a human aspect to it.
Right.
And that's just the way it is.
And fallibility is one thing. Fallibility is one thing. I'm just going to say that cheating is another.
Oh,
right.
Absolutely.
And it becomes obvious. I'm going to go back to the original thing, my original mea culpa, my confession about telling jokes that even by the standards of that day were inappropriate. Mm-hmm. You knew that I don't want to go old Jiminy Cricket, but you knew they were inappropriate because you didn't tell that joke about Bob's group when Bob was around.
Right.
Right? If you find yourself whispering the joke, you probably shouldn't tell it. At least not in the office. Right? So those kinds of things, we know about that. Let's take the case of Louis C.K. All right. And Louis C.K., exposing himself to people. And that's not open to negotiation. That's not open to, I thought it was okay. Right? We kind of, if you're over the age of 4, to pull your pants up. Right? That's just, that's just the way it is. Right. So, with that said, a lot of the stuff that we talk about with cancel culture, I get it. If you're on one side, there are things that are complicated. Again, a boycott of South Africa, yay, we're fighting apartheid. A boycott of Israel, BDS or Israel, got to think about that one. I do believe that there are certain principles in America that really make sense, right? No shouting fire in a crowded movie theater. Those kinds of things. Look, I was watching. I was watching the demonstrations out of Minnesota last night, and I understand about being angry. I understand that. Seriously, it is probably, how do you explain how bad things are in America in 2021? We had to interrupt the coverage of the trial of a police officer who shot an unarmed black man to talk about a police officer who shot an unarmed black man 10 miles away, right? That's where we're up. I understand that. But I'm going to go on the other side. Nobody thinks that throwing a soda can at the police is okay. Nobody's like, well, I'm sorry, I thought it was free speech. Right? That's not in our lexicon. You may feel that you have no other option to make your voice heard than that, and I get that. I know the Martin Luther King, a riot is a demonstration that you're unheard, that there's no other way to do that, and I understand that. It's still not okay. That you are violating the laws. Let me also go back and say this. I think January 6th was a turning point in America, and I said that in my last presentation, that it was a wake-up call for us. Right? And you have to look at some of the social media and where's free speech and what's not free speech. And that's where it comes into this. Yes, great question about not offended by the same thing and let me speak on that, but let me go back to January 6th for a second. There's stuff that it does not require nuance. Spraying bear spray at Officer Sicknick is not something that I thought it was okay.
No.
In no one's lexicon, no one's mind. Do you think that's okay? Let me address the issue about what's offensive and what's not offensive. And I don't mean to dodge that community standards thing, but there's stuff that contributes to harm. There's stuff that we all can agree on, or that most of us can agree on. Most of us, right? And I reference this about reduction to the ridiculous, about picking out one thing that's at the extreme and focusing on that. Let me just say that if something is harmful, if you are advocating violence towards another group, if you are advocating people that advocate rape, whatever form it is in online, there's that. The other part that I think is a governing principle is capitalism, which is to say, if the majority of people in the United States are willing to support something and a minority aren't, well, that's majority rule, right?
Unfortunately,
there's stuff that has to be legally done. I don't care whether some particular community. You guys know that child pornography is not illegal in St. Petersburg, Russia, right? You knew that.
I didn't know it, but it doesn't surprise me.
Unfortunately. All right, so St. Petersburg has got a nice little industry of it's not for them. It's if you have a server that's serving child pornography, and it's in St. Petersburg, you can't So I'm just going to say that if I say I'm barring child pornography, or I'm barring servers that have an IP address or a range in St. Petersburg because I think that they might be hosting this, or I know that they are, that's not cancel culture, guys. I mean, let's be real about this.
Right.
If I say that Louis C.K. has offended me and I don't want to watch his show, that's not cancel culture.
Right.
All right? If you say, I think Louis C.K. is still funny, in fact, I think he's even funnier now, I just wish he wasn't wearing pants all the time, and you want to vote for him with your pocketbook, he did pay-per-view, he did, online, and blew through all kinds of records on that, right? The law isn't stopping him from doing that. I just have the right to say, I don't want to host him on my site.
Right.
Right. But now, with that being said, there are so many people, and I'm gonna utilize both sides of the political spectrum here. The left is going to say, "Hey, I don't like what the right is saying, so we need to shut them down." But yet, if the right says that, it's the left is screaming fascism, fascism. You're a fascist. When you're trying to totally shut down what
Red, where are we shutting them down? If you're saying it's Twitter rules, or if you're saying
I'm not talking anything on social media. I'm talking period. In general, there is such an uproar when a conservative will say something, and if it doesn't go with someone else's agenda, they lose it, right? However, if the tables are turned, it gets deemed racist or labeled something, or they'll say,
are you saying that the words racist hurt you?
Not at all.
Okay, and because I'm distinguishing between two things. There are no laws prohibiting offensive, that type of offensive speech. There are no laws in that. But if I own the social media platform,
I'm not talking social media.
Basically, what I'm saying is you can't make me have you come into my house and insult me. You can stay in your house and insult me all you want, but you can't come into my house. Now, if you say, yeah, but Larry, you got a much nicer house. First of all, you'd be wrong, but second of all, but second of all, That's the way economics works. I mean, again, I'm going to come back and say Donald Trump got kicked off of Twitter. But the federal government didn't shut him down.
Correct. The big thing is that we forget, like, there is a difference. Like, when I talk about cancel culture, when I mention cancel culture, much like all of us have been talking about, like, it's very nuanced and it's very semantics because words do matter.
Yeah.
But the thing is like you said, I can choose whether or not I want this to come into my home. I can choose whether or not I turn the TV on or I go on Twitter or Twitch or any other social media platform. They can decide whether or not they want whatever I'm promoting on their channel or on their platform. But the big thing, at least for me, is like when I talk about cancel culture, I mean, it's very nuanced because you can't, much like with many other things, you can't paint it with a broad brush. You can, but it's so nuanced.
If I go to see a comedian and the comedian makes a joke about pedophilia, I'm probably walking out.
Mm-hmm.
And I probably won't pay to see that person again. And I'll tell all my friends not to go see that person. And that's okay.
Which is your right to do.
If that same comedian makes a joke about racism, my reaction might be the same on that or will be the same on that. But not everyone that agreed with me on the first thing, well, pedophilia is wrong, but racism's okay because that was funny. Just say it. And
Some people
let
might
me
not see it the same way.
I will. I mean, there are jokes to be said on both sides of that. But that said, again, what we're talking about when we're talking about cancel culture is where is it being canceled?
Mm-hmm.
If the means of communication today are privately owned, right? I mean, Twitter's a company. Twitch is part of Amazon, right? If you come out and say, well, it's not fair, Jeff Bezos is has more gold than is imaginable, and he owns Amazon, and he doesn't like my opinion. Well,
he could really care less if you like his opinion or not, because
I just look at that and say it's billionaires fighting with trillionaires, right? Those are things that I think are nuanced. When you get into Mitch McConnell's position about just send money, and I'm not talking about political contributions, I think Mitch is 100% wrong, and I would vote against it. I think that the corporations can have whatever opinion they want and should really state what their opinions are, or don't have to, but that's fine. I just don't think they should be able to give money to politicians.
Right. Well, and the thing is too, is that the cancel culture, it can go for politics. It can go for, pretty much anything having to do with humans in general. And like I said before, there is a big difference between accountability and trying to cancel somebody out completely. Not just cancel them so their voice isn't heard, but I mean, you go to deplatforming, to all sorts of things. If you try to completely cancel somebody's opinion, now, if they're being illegal, that's different.
Let me push back on that and say we live in an age, particularly, it's funny, in this year of 2021, there are more alternatives. There are more alternative platforms. So if you say somebody has been canceled off of Twitter, well, there's Gab.
There's so many different things. Yeah. Yep.
And I think that again that's a real difference. I think I think that when we're talking about it being canceled, let's go back to It Happened on Mulberry Street, Dr. Seuss book, right? I read that book to both of my kids. I'm from New York originally. You can certainly hear my New York accent when I say certain words. It's a quarter.
Right. Right.
I went to the library. That said, I read that to both of my kids, and I don't believe that it I don't believe it was a terrible thing. On the other hand, you look at some of the images of the stereotypes, and I find it offensive. When the estate of Dr. Seuss, the Theodore Gesell, says we don't want to sell this anymore, that's their right. And when people say, "Oh, that's cancel culture," because I want to read it, well, go read it. They didn't make all the copies disappear. The thing still exists. You can go find it. I just don't want to sell it anymore.
Right.
I run into this all the time. Where a particular store asks for one of my games, and either for contractual reasons, some of my IP is licensed, some of it just doesn't work. But beyond that, I have the right to say this is mine, and I don't want to sell it there. Mm-hmm. If that decision, I've never made a political decision on that. But I'm not ruling out that day could come.
Right.
If the Daily Stormer says to me, if KKK.org or whatever their website is or whatever says, hey, we're opening up a new games division and we want to put some of your games on there, my answer is going to be no.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not trying to make it ridiculous. I'm just simply saying to you that what we're talking about canceling the person, that really doesn't happen. Louis C.K. made more money on his own than he was making touring before. Mm. On the other hand, I will say Bill Cosby committed, crimes and here's a thing for you that I saw recently that there's a sentiment that women claim rape to be famous, but nobody can name the 60 victims that came up against Bill Cosby. That said, Bill Cosby's job, the Bill Cosby Show, was he was America's dad. Yeah, that kind of went away.
Right.
That's not something that we on the left did to him. That's something that, now, to Red's point, and I get it, if you say that, well, the playing field isn't level, that there are perhaps more people that feel this way. If you say that the tech bros that control a lot of the media today are lean towards the left rather than the right, yeah, that's probably the way it is. I'm going to go back and point out to you that at one time, William Randolph Hearst was the biggest media mogul in America, and he was a right-leaning bigot. Mm. That's just the way it is. The only thing that I can say is that while that's offensive, I'm gonna probably wind down, and I do want to take questions, and but I just want to as a summary say what I hope people in our audience got from tonight. One is that we had a civil debate. Red and I feel very different. I mean, you used the word respect at the very beginning of it. Whatever differences there may be between us, Red, one thing is we have the same barber.
Very good one at that.
I mean, that's part of. We do have that civil debate. Mm-hmm. And that's what's important. If you approach with respect, it will not be 100% of the time, but very often the person will engage in a debate in a forum with you. Sometimes if you find out about the other person, Red, we've talked about gun control a couple of times, and I'm going to bring up my friend. I'll give a shout out to Brian Bruning. Brian's been a good friend of mine for many years. I'm glad that Brian brought up that he's a gun owner. It's funny, that comes up. That said, one of the things that's missing in America today is the desire to achieve consensus. The majority of NRA members agree on the same principles about ID checks, about background checks. How much could we eliminate? How many lives could we save if we said, if you've committed a felony, you shouldn't be able to buy a gun anywhere, whether it's at a show or not. You shouldn't.
Okay,
shouldn't
so
be able to.
I'm sorry. I want to interject to those who have never been to a gun show. Do not assume that it is easy to just walk into some big gun show and buy a gun, because it's not. A good portion of the sellers
it depends on what state, and often the exceptions that are done are violating the rules of both the show and about the state laws.
Right. Most of the states that I have visited and been to gun shows at, most of the people selling there they have the 4473, which is the federal background check, which is done by the ATF. Religiously, and I used to sell firearms for a gun store, so these aren't, more often than not, the criminals are getting these guns private sale off the streets, and that's something that, unless you take guns completely away, in theory, it's not ever going to stop.
So one of the sources, again, there's a body of evidence on this, and this is stuff. Again, this discussion is exactly what we should be having. There are a number of gun shops. I believe that they usually have 6 that contribute to the majority of illegal firearms. And what they do is they use straw dogs. They will sell the guns to Mexico, and the guns will then be shipped back to the United States for illegal sales. We know that. And those are exactly. Those are exactly the kinds of things, Red, that you and I could sit down and go through on a nuance. This would be the benefit of doing this. Most of the stuff doesn't require even new laws. It requires enforcement of the current laws. And I say to people, look, I'm not trying to stop 100% of them, but if I could save one life, I'm okay with that. That seems to make sense to me. Again, it's reaching consensus through debate.
Right.
And the kernel of that is always respect.
Absolutely.
I don't need to be on shows where I'm glad that you and I have well reasoned and respectful disagreements. I don't need to be on. I don't need to be. No. I don't need to be in an echo chamber.
Right.
I don't.
Exactly. Yep.
Right. That's the problem with the algorithm on social media, that it's going to show me more things that will, if I'm to the left, it's going to push me further to the left. And if I'm to the right, it's going to push me further to the right. And that's true throughout. That's stuff that we can talk about. And again, when you talk about these corporations, it's not governed under First Amendment, but I think that we can talk about the most good for the most people.
Absolutely.
And those are things that by and large Americans can agree on.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. That is, you're 100% correct on that. Unfortunately, something I've noticed a very disturbing trend. Talking about social media is, you're right. If you follow one thing, it'll steer you further that direction or this direction or up or down or left or right, whatever. And unfortunately, that is breeding more extremism, which, as you know, Larry, we at Beyond Barriers are trying to combat on a regular basis. And it's unfortunate. And this is where we can start dismantling the ties of extremism, is by this open dialogue, when the general public can tune in and they can ask questions. And that's one thing I love about being able to talk like this, because let's face it, this isn't a common occurrence every day, right?
When I was on that show, and I know you guys have linked to it, when I talked about my involvement with Beyond Barriers, it's funny. One of the things I didn't get so I was hosted on a show with a rabbi and a Jewish media commentator out here in Las Vegas, and they both said, "Why are you talking to neo-Nazis?" And I said, "I'm not. I'm talking to former neo-Nazis to begin with." I said, but I said, again, the the answer to extremism is not silence. Is not that just drives people in more. But
exactly.
But after the show was over, I said to them, you're asking the wrong question.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be asking me as a Jew, why am I talking to former neo-Nazis? You should say, wow, what didn't I understand about former neo-Nazis that they're willing to talk to a Jew?
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. And I want to kind of go on record as to say thank you to, first of all, to everybody who's tuned in and putting up with our jibber jabber. It's amazing. The fact that all these people show up and listen to us. It's amazing. And Larry, I love our conversations, man. Regardless of the fact whether we agree, disagree, or even meet in the middle. It's, if nothing else, it helps one another learn something from someone else, right? And we've said it more than once tonight, and it does come back to respect, and it comes back to, we don't have to agree 100% on everything. We can still be respectful, and we can still love one another as human beings. And this open dialogue is, I feel, step number 1 through 10 even, that is a major part that is missing in our society.
Do we have enough time? I've got more energy than I thought I would. Do we have enough time to take some questions?
I have a few more minutes available. Acacia, I don't see on here. You know what, ladies and gentlemen, if you're hearing us, Acacia, do we have a little bit more time, or where are we?
Yeah, we've got more time. I mean, technically, we have as much time as we want to take.
I see Wings and Halo saying we have all this happening with cancel culture, but the big question I have is how do we change this trend and realize that not everyone is offended by the same thing, and by catering to one, you offend another. First of all, I just want to say I'm offended by that. I'm but no, I think that's a great question, and I think that at the core of it, I really and truly do believe that if you take a completely diverse audience and you showed them 100 statements, they wouldn't agree on and ask them to judge offensive, non-offensive. I don't think that they would agree on 100% of the time.
Right.
But boy, I bet you that they'd agree on more than 50%. I think that they would look at that. I think that they would look at let me give you an example, just one, it won't offend anyone using this as an example. The stereotype picture of the Chinese fellow from Mulberry Street from the Dr. Seuss book that had buck teeth and had I think that if you showed that to 100 people, 75% would go, yeah, that's offensive. Maybe it would be higher than that. Maybe it would be 90%. I think that those kinds of things. I go back to some of the stereotypes of African Americans. If you showed that to people today, and again, it may not have been offensive in 1908, but in 2021, yeah, we pretty much agree on that stuff. So I think that that's part of it, and I also think that we've kind of come to court decisions on that, on community standards. All right. What is offensive in Alabama might not be offensive in Michigan. What is offensive in Michigan might not be offensive in Alabama. And so you have those standards. But truly, I think that we have, look, I won't tell you what I think of Tucker Carlson. Hypocrite is the least of it, but
yeah, we probably won't see eye to eye on that one.
Most people on the left aren't saying the government should ban Tucker Carlson. The statement of, if you're a sponsor of his show, I won't buy your product, is the same thing that leads people to pay for the sponsorship in the first place. It's the corollary of it, saying, well, I want to appeal to this audience, So
Right.
I'm going to advertise on a show that appeals to it. I think that that's capitalism in action. You vote with your pocketbook.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
That's I just want to distinguish between, we've talked about boycott and cancel culture. I just want to distinguish between, you don't have to buy everything.
Correct.
I'm probably not going to buy the pillow guy's pillows, right? I mean, that's just, now, to be honest with you, I wasn't going to buy his pillows anyway. But I mean, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter. But that said, I think that's okay. I don't think that we should try to fix that.
Right. And we have another question here. Somebody asked, for our listeners that aren't able to view this, can you address the vigilante aspect of cancel culture? Many people believe movements such as Me Too are a positive force for change. But as we have seen, for example, with the Amber Heard Johnny Depp scandal, the facts, quote unquote, that make the media often don't tell the whole story. Now, this person also said that's not his favorite example, but it does illustrate what he's trying to ask.
No, I'll take that. I'll take that up. I think, again, before the show began, I told a quote from Mark Twain that Mark Twain said there are three kinds of lies: a lie, a damn lie, and a statistic. And that said tongue in cheek. But I think, for example, I don't really follow I know vaguely about Johnny Depp, and I think there's two things on there. One is it is difficult to prove that abuse didn't happen, and it is difficult to prove that abuse did happen. In religious law, and it was Sharia law at one time, and I don't again, I'm not an expert on this, but I do know that there was this part that an accusation of rape was only considered justifiable if there was a witness to it. Mm-hmm. Let me rephrase that: if there was a male witness to it, because women couldn't testify in court. And again, I don't want to get into reduction to the ridiculous. I don't want to do that. But I think when you look at the statistics, the majority of times that somebody is accused of abuse, that there is a preponderance of evidence on that. Does that mean that it's 1,000% true? No, and that's why I picked the Fatty Arbuckle case by intent, right. Because here was somebody that was accused of rape, and there was an overwhelming amount of evidence that it didn't happen.
Correct.
And beyond that, there were trials. After three chances to try to convict the guy, if the last one resulted in the jury issuing an apology to him, then you were probably wrong. Right. I picked that with this question in mind. I think that the majority of times these accusations tend to be founded. Mm-hmm. The difficult part comes in. Distinguishing between consensual and non-consensual, and that's one of those. Were you there? That said, fortunately, I don't have to be the judge or the jury in that, right?
Right.
Again, it's it.
Well,
what was her name?
Lorena Bobbitt.
What was her name? Yep. Lorena Bobbitt. That that the polite term that emasculated her husband.
Yes.
Yes.
I believe his last words were "a little bit off the top, please." You're gonna have to have me back from my humor show, but
right?
Yes.
But why did that case get so much coverage? The reason the case got so much coverage is because there are 30,000 incidents of domestic violence in America every year, and yet those on the other side could hold up this one example and say, "Well, women do it too." Okay.
Right.
We've had the case of Tawana Brawley back in New York, and it's not the only one, but certainly these are rare, who claimed she was raped and branded. I mean, there was a whole backstory, and it was made up out of whole cloth. Again, those are the exception. Let's not try to fix something that isn't broken 99.9% of the time.
Right.
Hope that's a fair example.
I think what Scott was saying, he said, who is right or wrong is not really isn't what he was asking. It's pretty much that vigilantes don't wait for trials or testimony. They just act on what they think they know or what they've been told. And I will say this, and then I'll let you speak, Red and Larry, is that there's a difference between saying, you know what, I choose not to buy this product for myself, or I choose not to watch this actor or this actress. I choose not to do this or that. But for me at least, when you try to either cancel out history, you try to cancel out the person and not, like I said, and we've talked about this earlier, there's so many nuances. If you are deliberately trying to cancel a person, meaning they can't get a job anywhere, like, to sum it up, we are all humans. We all have a choice as to whether or not we want to watch something, whether we want it enter our house or not, or whether we want to support it. For me, at least, when we try to take history away, and when we try to literally make it so that a person can't survive because we don't agree with them, not necessarily because they actually did something wrong. There's a difference. There are consequences to our choices, to the things that we decide to do. And whether that's good or bad, we have to know that every choice we make will have a consequence. Me choosing to have this show, people might not agree with me, and people might be like, you know what? I'm not going to watch you because you're crap. Okay, that's your choice. Or because somebody had a past, Red's got a past, I've got a past, everybody's got a past. And if they choose to judge me because of that, that's their choice. But the problem I see with it, where it comes in, is that we have a lot of society, especially here in America, but everywhere, that because I don't agree with you, you are the enemy. It becomes an us versus them. And that, for me at least, is where it irks me to no end of this cancel culture, and how it's like you suddenly are not a human being because I don't agree with you.
And I've seen that. I think the media plays a huge part in that. Now, and bear with me as I stumble through this. There used to be a thing as unbiased journaling, at least so it appears. Okay, I think that. Yeah, I know where you're going.
right.
Now, the other thing that I think drives that as a driving factor with some of this vigilantism and so forth does come from social media. There are sometimes news stories or stories in general that are shared that maybe all the facts aren't presented, whether it's to try to fit a narrative or not. Sometimes it's somebody posting something without knowing all the facts. I know I myself have been very guilty of that on a very regular basis, and I know there's people that call me out on it all the time. And you know what? I'm glad they do, because that helps me learn, right? So I think if we can, as a whole, okay, I don't give two shits about the political spectrum at this point, but as a society as a whole, as a people, can agree on something, to be factual in what we're saying, right? this could really go down a rabbit hole that I'm not going to go down. But yeah.
So let me bring up 2 points. First of all, more immediate. Read about that apolitical and unbiased journalism. I'm only 65, so I don't remember that. Let me go back and tell you. There's a quote. I don't know if it's true, but it may be apocryphal. I mentioned William Randolph Hearst. The American warship, the Maine, blew up in Havana Harbor.
Yes.
And we don't know to this day whether it was a boiler room explosion or something more insidious.
Right.
And I believe this is an apocryphal story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Supposedly, Hearst said to the reporter, his man on the ground in Cuba, he said, "Get me the pictures for the war." And the reporter said, how do you know that there's going to be a war? And Hearst responded saying, "You get me the pictures and I'll get you the war." That might have been an apocryphal story, but
right.
I suggest you look at the Gulf of Tonkin incident with the USS Maddox and what we know to be the facts, and that got us into the second longest war in American history, prior to Afghanistan, right? So
right.
That said, I mean, I do not believe that. I also want to point out that there's an element not of political correctness. It's not that, but there's an element of our prurient interests. See, the thing about rape is it makes a great story.
Unfortunately, a lot of people.
And you know what the oldest saying in the newspaper business is? The oldest saying in the newspaper business is, "If it bleeds, it leads."
Right, and sensationalism sells, unfortunately, and oftentimes with that, unfortunately, that can lead to misinformation being passed. I'm not going to use the term.
If we can show a good-looking woman and we have blood, that's like.
Right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're not wrong. It's no different than in Hollywood or on TV for that matter. Sex.
The other thing that I was going to say, and I don't mean to challenge my lovely host on this, but about people's lives being destroyed. How many millions of dollars does Johnny Depp have left? Do you think he needs $5 from me?
See, I'm not talking personally. I'm not talking about the ones in Hollywood. But you are. I understand what you're saying.
But again, I mean, we talk about this and we say, well, I don't want to see people's lives being destroyed. But if I ask you to show me where somebody's lives were destroyed, I mean, there are cases. There are cases of people who've been driven to suicide. There are cases.
Yep.
But if you take a look at, Fatty Arbuckle died at age 46. He never worked again after this, and he died at age 46. I want to say from a heart attack, which may have been caused by the fact that he was Fatty Arbuckle, not Slim and Healthy Arbuckle, right? I'm just saying.
That's probably more due to health concerns than it would be cancel culture. But anyways, go ahead.
But again, when we start talking about this, I mean, I can offer plenty of cases. I mean, geez, after the accusations started coming out on heart, I teach a lot of cult classes in Jewish culture, and I always say this, that if you want to claim Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud, you get those. But you also end up with Harvey Weinstein and Epstein in there,
right.
And the now late Bernie Madoff with all your money, Bernie. That it's all part of that package deal. If you start looking at the other side of it, about people we knew that they were bad and toxic, and yet their careers went on for years, for decades. I think that there are far more of them than the people you can say were injured by cancel culture. Just putting that out there.
Well, and that's why I make the distinction between Hollywood figures being quote unquote canceled and your average everyday person being canceled, because I have known people that have been canceled because of their past that no longer, and you know that.
And you know what? I will just say it just sucks to be poor and disenfranchised in America.
It does.
And that, I mean, that's true for everybody. That said, I want to say something that is a kind of bridge thing. And Red, this is really for you. I have been working. I'm in the games industry. Everybody knows that.
Right.
I have been involved in speaking out and not I say speaking out as though it was something radical, but about talking about the politics of games, about talking about, what's the impact of this? What do we learn from this? Right. There's that Fallujah game out now. That's 6 days in Fallujah, something along those.
I know the one you're talking about. That
people are saying, this game shouldn't be sold. And my feeling is more or less on that. You're right. I'm certainly not going to buy it, but what should dictate that is just don't buy it.
Right.
Right. I mean that, if it's not violating standards, and I haven't played it enough to know if it's not violating standards,
right.
The first overtly political game that I worked on was in 2004. Shout out to my friends over at Stardock. It was the Political Machine.
Okay.
Right. And it was the first of a series. Every 4 years, Stardock does the Political Machine, and it's a political simulation game. It has some really interesting stuff. It has sliders and what are popular. That's it.
Really?
It's you're running from.
I'm actually kind of intrigued now. But anyways.
Yeah, and really, give a shout out on that. It's an interesting thing. It's worth learning about. That said, since that time, I have been involved as the liberal coming on into conservative sites. And I will say this, whether it's a quality of my personality, because I am at the end of the day charming. But for whatever it is, whether it's the fact that I approach it with respect, whatever the thing is, I have been welcomed far more. I can't tell you. I mean, it would be less than the fingers of one hand of the time people have said, no, we don't agree with you. We're not going to have you on as a guest or as a speaker.
Right.
What I have found in more cases is when my liberal friends find that I don't agree with them 100%, that they're not that they're dismissive or that they cancel me by any means,
right.
but that they're shocked about that. I don't care much for Ronald Reagan, but one quote of his that I use fairly often is it's not what liberals don't know that gets them in trouble. It's what they don't know that they don't know.
Yeah.
That said, I'm going to hammer home just one last point at 7:55. Some 14 hours, 7:56 now. 14 hours after my day started today. But I think that one of the truths that the algorithm on social media really hides is that on the majority of stuff that is really important, we all agree. And I don't mean even just Americans. I mean worldwide. The stuff that is really value, centered, I think the majority of us agree on that. I said that was going to be the last point. I have one other thing. I have a buddy. I don't know if I told you this. We had used this scary word about Marxist culture once before that.
Right.
I'm first generation American. My father was born in Russia. It was even before the Soviet Union. My father was born in Tsarist Russia. He came over to the United States in 1911. My grandfather came over to the United States in 1908. He had fled a Siberian labor camp. My grandfather's name in Yiddish was Yankel the Anarchist, was Jack the Anarchist.
Oh, wow.
Jack the Red. All right. And his appreciation of Marxism came from the fact that he grew up in a society where there were still serfs, where people were bought and sold, right? So when you look at the origins of of Russian communism or Chinese communism or Cuban communism, you have to understand what went before then. And if you look at that and you say, well, Russian communism was pretty awful, and certainly as I've pointed out, we didn't do too well under Stalin. That wasn't a great trade up for us, right? No. They're still finding mass graves that are left over from that area. You talked about Cambodia and about Pol Pot, right? Again, I mean, not a good thing. But that you have to look at history as the ebb and flow. When you study history, one of the things that you will find is that there really, really has been progress. And that things that we look at as being terrible right now probably aren't so bad in the grand scheme of things. I say this about COVID, and I do not mean to treat this lightly. But and I'm certainly, if I've had my 2 shots of Pfizer, and that wasn't enough for me, so I also had a flu shot on top of it. I figure suspenders and a belt can't hurt, right? That said, as awful as this global pandemic has been, let's just remember that during the Black Death, 1/4 of France died. So things are progressing, and we should bear that in mind. As we talk about people on the stuff that really matters, most of us would agree on what's important.
Right. No, I would agree with that. Like it's a lot of it is about finding the common ground. I know somebody mentioned, about so where was it? Sorry. Asking, well, because most of the time cancel culture gets the bad guy, we should tolerate the few that get hurt. No, it's more about.
That's not the American system of justice either. Here's a quote that I saw recently, and I kind of like this. The difference between a liberal and a conservative. A liberal wants to feed 100 people because one of them might be starving. A conservative wants to deny food to 100 people because one of them might not be starving.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that.
I don't know if I agree with it either.
I'll agree to disagree.
I don't know if I agree with that either. But I do think that that what underlies that is we should err on the side of forgiveness.
Gotcha.
That's what I think is the
important piece to grab from it. And I think so. I think, a lot of times, and I really appreciate you coming on because obviously, we do agree on a lot of different fronts, and there's other fronts that we're just not going to agree on, or we agree with certain aspects of it, and that's okay. But the fact that, and there's even things, both Red and I probably tend to lean more on the conservative side, but there's still things that he and I wouldn't agree on. So
absolutely. I mean,
we're all human. We're all different.
I tell you what, there's friends of mine that are very hardcore Christian conservatives that no longer speak to me because I don't fit into that category. Yeah, I do lean a little more to the right. However, there's a lot on the left that I tend to agree with. And it really it confuses people, and it's kind of fun, to be honest with you. But
it shows that politics is not what makes the person. The fact that somebody's more liberal, more conservative, more whatever, we're all individual human beings. And that is what we should ultimately, it's kind of like what you were saying, Larry, as far as like, there's always going to be the nuances. So what is really the most important thing? Like I grew up very conservative Christian, thank God for the parents that I have that like they raised me with really good values and instilled in me really good things. there are things that obviously we don't agree on now because I'm definitely more liberal in many aspects. But it's the fact that we still can get along. I still love them. They're still my parents. I might not agree with everything, but I guess where I'm going with this is that I know there was a point in time that I can look back at, and I can look at, certain individuals and be like, well, I'm not a Christian. I'm not conservative. So I'm going to they're going to snub their nose at me. And that's not right either, because we are the fact that we all have our own brain and we all think differently, and the fact that we can come together, and there's always going to be things. No two people are alike. Even I have cousins that are identical twins. They're identical in a lot of their features, to which, they're, oh my goodness. Yeah. They're probably, sorry. I'm like, how old are they? Yeah,
I have
they're
those
probably
moments too.
They're like in their 40s. Well, it just reminds me of how old I'm getting. Which yeah. So it's like, they're even in their 40s now, and I still have a hard time telling them apart, and I've grown up with them, but I can tell them apart by their mannerisms, by the different things that they like.
Say you just bring up a Fox News logo and the one that growls,
Right? Exactly.
Guys, I love you. Thank you very much for having me on. And I'm gonna pack it in. Tomorrow's gonna be another long day, and let me just say, thus endeth the sermon. Thank you again for having me on as a guest.
Thank you so much.
Guys,
definitely follow Larry. Follow Larry on Twitter. And also, I definitely want to get a shout out to the new game. And I'll let you give that shout out.
Remastered.
Yes. So definitely check it out, Night Dive Studios, and it's on Steam and available. Actually, Night Dive Twitch was doing it last night.
My understanding is that if I do my job right tomorrow, it goes on to the Humble store as well. So
yes.
Oh, fantastic!
Coming out on console by the end of the year. So again, thank you very much for this, and have a good night, guys.
You have a great night, Larry.
Next time I come on, Jewish comedy. I'll
go.
telling all my jokes.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Larry. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Wow, that was awesome. It definitely went longer. And for all of you guys tuning in and listening to this, the VOD will be up on Twitch. And I will also, I will probably split it up into two different podcasts just because it's a long one, but it's a very needed one. And thank you to everybody that tuned in and everybody that commented. And actually, I did want to say this real quick. SD Scott, I appreciate your comments a lot, and you have a lot of really good points. Should we tolerate the destroying of some lives because more lives aren't destroyed? And it's. Honestly, a lot of it comes to philosophical conversations, which actually here pretty soon we will have a friend of mine, Corey, from Ireland on. And he was an archaeologist. He also does a lot with philosophy and everything. And that's one thing we talk about is how we as human beings are ever evolving and we are ever learning, being ing as in the verb, not in the noun, because that's the human condition. We never stop. We never stop learning. And I was going to mention, he mentioned about Pol Pot in the 1970s in Cambodia and the Cambodian genocide. And one thing that I did want to mention, and this goes along with cancel culture real quick, is if we look at history and we try to take the things out of history that we don't like, we try to cancel them, we will be doomed to have the same mistakes over again. Pol Pot tried to take it back to zero and, start over. We are going to start over from here. And
we can't.
Did not end well. No.
No. And unfortunately, if that is, it seems to me to be a trend that is going to continue, and it's a very dangerous and slippery slope that could potentially lead us down a path to events that we don't want to see in our lifetime. Okay?
Absolutely.
And for everybody that is tuned in, please understand these conversations that we have are not designed to offend or to oppress or any of that bullshit. We are here to simply educate and sometimes entertain.
Yeah.
We are people who are able to have different point of views and come together in a civil fashion and have that respect and that common ground understanding, and know that just because we don't agree doesn't make the other person horrible.
And it doesn't make them our enemy.
Exactly. And that is a lesson that really needs to be retaught in our society. Respect is something that I feel has gone to the wayside, and it really needs to be reinstilled in all of our people on both sides.
Absolutely. And Scott, you are very, very right. When we cancel the parts of the story that makes us uncomfortable, we also eliminate some of the context of the story. And Larry actually hit the nail on the head with that one too. You have to look at the context. You can pick and choose what you want. You can, that's exactly it. If we want to cancel one part of history, well, then we got to cancel another. And before you know it, it's just like, if we're only highlighting the things in life and in this world that are happy-go-lucky, that we agree with, that fit inside our own echo chamber, then we're doomed. Because you're missing out on so much more.
Yep.
Because there's that age-old saying that history repeats itself. Well, why does history repeat itself? Because we choose to keep only that which is good and that which makes us feel happy, and we don't want to talk about the uncomfortable things. Believe me, the way I grew up was, if it wasn't great, if it was uncomfortable, I didn't want to talk about it. And I still struggle with that to this day, that I make myself and I remind myself that we need, Red, you and I have mentioned this on hashtag the more you know, we need to talk about the things that make us uncomfortable sometimes.
You know what we do. And it is something that we can't get away from, folks. There are, for lack of better words, shitty things in our nation's history. There are dark times in our nation's history. Does that make us infallible? No. Does that make us perfect? Does that make us horrible people? It does not. To try to sit and blame people today for the actions of yesterday, it's kind of ludicrous. All right.
Right.
The fact of the matter is, we do have a dark history in our country, but those of us who are alive today are not responsible for those past actions. We need to drop all the barriers and all the bullshit and come together as one people. All right, this is getting old. This animosity, this fighting, it's done. It's played out. Right? It's just, in the words of the late George Carlin, it's all bullshit and it's bad for you.
Exactly. Well, and the thing is too is that we forget so many times that, and especially, and I'll use the US as an example. I talk to people in the UK, I talk to people all over the world, and I appreciate the experience to be able to do that, because it helps me understand what's going on. Because a lot of times here in America, we get so caught up on only what's happening in America and forget that we are one small part of an entirely big picture, which is the world, and that everything will affect it. But where I'm going with that is that here in America, at least politically, and it's spreading to even more than just politically, it's right versus left, Republican versus Democrat. And what we need to do is get back to the basics. Like, I would hear people say that when I was younger, and I'm like, oh, that sounds so dumb, but it's so true. What really matters? What, and because you have a differing opinion from me, whether it's political, social, economic, religious, whatever, if you have a differing opinion from me, that doesn't make you an enemy.
Right.
It's not the us versus them. And that's what we need to get back to. And that's why we have conversations like this. That's why we have discourse like this. Because that's the only way that real effective change is going to happen. Is if we can come together and have these hard conversations little by little. Do I think having an hour or 2 hour long podcast is going to change the entire world overnight? Absolutely not. But we change it one life at a time, one conversation at a time, one discussion at a time.
Exactly. And, folks, as we come to wrapping this up, I want to throw a shout out to Beyond Barriers. Our website is www.beyondbarriersusa.org, and you can find links to these podcasts, all the ones we've done for Coffee and Conversation, hashtag the more you know, and the Beyond Barriers podcast. They are wonderful, wonderful tools to get into the minds of who we are at Beyond Barriers and what we try to do. The website
Absolutely.
is very easy to navigate. There's a contact tab. There's a media tab, articles. There's news stories. If you click on the team, you can read through who we are and a little bit of our stories. There's also a donate tab. Now, I get it, folks. Life is tough right now. The pandemic has made damn sure of that, right?
Right.
But any donation that you are able and willing to give, it is tax deductible under the 501c3 tax code. Now, what does that mean? A lot of the mumbo jumbo, yeah, I get it. But what that means for you is that you get to write off that donation on your taxes. So essentially, you're getting that money back. We would appreciate any likes, follows, shares, etc. on social media, because that just expands our audience. We want to continue to bring you this programming. We want to be able to expand this programming to do even more. We love being able to interact with all of you. It is such an amazing experience that I can't begin to fathom, can't begin to even adequately express, right? You can also find us on Anchor FM, anchor.fm rather. You can also subscribe there as well. I believe it starts as low as 99 cents a month and goes up to $5 a month. I mean, that's a pretty reasonable price.
It's much like a Patreon, but it's strictly for all the podcasts. And with that, you get all the Beyond Barriers podcasts. We try to do at least 2 episodes of that a month. It is run by myself and Jeff Scoop, another former extremist, and the founder of Beyond Barriers. And so you'll also have that. You'll have these. And if anybody is interested in more information or want to know, because we also understand that times are tough. Not everybody can financially give. Absolutely. But even giving of your time and stuff like that. So feel free. You can email us at info@beyondbarriersusa.org. I'll put it up in the chat. Also, Beyond Barriers, and I don't always touch on this, and I appreciate you putting the plug in there, Red, for it. Beyond Barriers, you have a lot of organizations out there that strictly are trying to get people to come away from extremism, no matter what type that is. But we at Beyond Barriers, yes, we want to bring people out of extremism and having been there ourselves, but it's also educating the communities, not just on the threat of extremism, but having discussions like these so that, we can come together as
further extremism.
Exactly. Preventing. So once again, I want to thank everybody for joining in. Thank you for Red for once again having another great coffee and convo. And thank you, Larry Kuperman, for joining us again. Next week, we will not have an episode, most likely. If something changes, I will put it in the schedule. But we should be back the following week with some more great conversation. And I appreciate every one of you. If you like the content on this channel, please feel free to subscribe to the Twitch,
hit that button,
to the
smash
Beyond Barriers YouTube, and we will see you all later. Any last words, Red?
Peace, love, and graham crackers, and just be good to one another.
Absolutely. Be good, everybody. Thank you so much.